Welcome to those of you who are new, and welcome back to those of you who have joined us before. Like Brittany said, we're going to cover some resources today when you're working with students who are homeless or students in care. And I kind of just summarized it as resources for house liaisons. So we're going to look at these 4 buckets. When I was thinking about your responses on the survey and then kind of looking at that in light of the duties for the house liaisons, it seems like these are the areas where folks are kind of interested in having some additional support. So housing resources, financial aid resources, and then training and advocacy resources. I think when you're trying to design your trainings for folks on your campus, there's a lot of great stuff out there. So I just kind of want to point you in those directions. And then finally, I made kind of a resource super list featuring all the stuff in this presentation, plus some of my favorites from presentations before. So again, this is kind of how I started to organize my thoughts for today, right? That when we talk about the house liaison, there are these areas around expertise and areas around navigation. So expertise is really kind of more where I'm focusing today, thinking about not so much definition. I feel like we're kind of solid there, but in terms of financial aid resources, continuum of care point people, other kinds of services and resources that could be appropriate for students experiencing homelessness or folks in care. And then tracking and monitoring retention and graduation. I'm not really going to touch on that too much. I feel like we talked about that a lot in session 2, but we can talk about it in the question and answer part if you have questions about that. And same kind of with data collection. But like I said, this piece around training the college's employees on how to identify folks, how to refer folks, I feel like that's an area we're going to spend a little additional time on today. Okay, so way back in session 1, we talked about how Illinois is organized into these continuum of care systems. And these are all of the systems currently in place in the state of Illinois. Now, how you figure out which system is your system is you basically use the HUD exchange. So HUD is Housing and Urban Development at the federal level, and they've set up this website to help connect their grantees at the state level, those continuum of care folks, with actual folks who need services. So what you do is you follow the link here at the bottom of the slide. That'll take you to this landing page over here on the left. You type in either a specific town or a geographic region, or if you keep that list of continuum of care handy, you can just type in the actual continuum of care ID number. So in this case, I used the Illinois 506 for the Joliet area continuum of care. And then you can see it'll pull for you the folks who are managing the continuum of care in your catchment area. And then you can reach out to those folks. So for example, you would probably, in this case, reach out to the point of contact for homeless persons, that second person, Joe O'Connor. The HMIS lead is also Joe in this case. Actually, Joe is all 3 people, but the HMIS lead is the person who does the data collection and kind of the support for this system. Again, this is kind of one of the points of doing it the way the continuum of care is organized, is that folks who are seeking services do a single application and then they can access services instead of doing an application every time that there is that they need some new kind of service. So that's what that is. So this to say, when you locate your system in the HUD exchange, look for the contact information for the person listed as POC, point of contact. And then again, there are probably folks on your campus who may already have that relationship set up. Again, these are the kinds of folks to look for on your campus who may know, or at your high school, if you know who the liaison there is, who's the McKinney-Vento rep there, they probably already are familiar with who the continuum of care contact person is. I was thinking too that it might be good to just give you some hotlines. These are the hotlines that are endorsed by HUD as resources for folks who are homeless and looking for services. So you can see here, one of the points they tell you is contact your continuum of care. So you'll already know how to do that. They also have set up a 211.org, and you can either call 211 or you can actually go to the website 211.org, and then that'll help connect students to various kinds of assistance in your area. And then again, you can also call the Illinois Department of Human Services helpline, or I also thought this website was kind of interesting. It's kind of a way to help a student just navigate to the point of entry in the continuum of care, this myentrypoint.org. So I was thinking these are good resources for students. They're good for staff to have. They're also good to be featured on your website when you're building your website and trying to include resources for students to be able to access when you're not necessarily available in your office. There were also a couple other things that I thought, oh, this could also be helpful. So again, we talked a little bit about folks who are homeless may be also coming from a domestic violence situation. For that reason, I put the Illinois Domestic Violence Hotline on your resource slide for today. Also, there's a specific group that works with veterans experiencing homelessness. So I thought that was pretty good. Also, there's the SAMHSA National Health Line. So that's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration's helpline. That's for folks who may be having mental health issues, may be having substance abuse, or maybe having both of those things going on at the same time. So I thought those were kind of good specific buckets to look at. And then this next one is just if you think you want to have a resource for students, again, thinking about after hours resources, if somebody needs to call and be screened by a professional, they're calling it a listener, this is a resource to give folks so that they can connect to somebody immediately if they're having some kind of crisis, especially involving mental health. So also for housing, getting folks into the continuum and trying to locate shelter is definitely a piece of it. But I also feel like the ultimate goal here is that folks are entering safe, clean, affordable, stable housing, right? So for that reason, these are some kind of longer term solutions that I think could be good to know about. The first one is Illinois Housing Development Authority, and it's called IDA. So I put, sounds like IDA. And they have on their website rental housing resources where it'll try to kind of match students with available approved resources in their area, available housing in their area. Also in Illinois, public housing authorities are kind of organized by county. So again, this has a link here to who the contact person is in your county for that public housing. Usually voucher systems or different kinds of opportunities open up at different points in the year. So it's kind of good to keep that on your radar. And then also, we haven't really talked too much about folks reentering society upon release from prison, but there is this Illinois reentry program, reentryillinois.net. And I thought that actually has some really great resources in the event that as a student is disclosing to you about their pathway through homelessness, that they mention that they have had some incarceration. So I thought those were all pretty solid resources to include on your websites. And then almost always, when you're talking to somebody who's talking to you about their experience with homelessness, at some point you're going to hear something and think, that sounds illegal to me. So again, I thought, how about if I give you a contact for fair housing and equal opportunity? So this group works to ensure that housing rights aren't violated. And if you feel like you're hearing something that maybe makes you think somebody's rights have been violated, you can basically reach out to these folks. The fair housing and equal opportunity folks have, again, organized kind of by region and county. So if you follow this link, you can follow it down to this level. So I put it just a screenshot here so you can see, like in Homewood, South Suburban Housing Center, in Wheaton, there's a different organization in Winnetka and Rockford and Chicago. So these are all folks who are able to work with students, screen their case, and then kind of get them on the road to filing the paperwork if they need to file paperwork and actually get a determination made. So I thought that was probably going to be something sooner or later that might be worth looking at. And the FHIP is Fair Housing Initiative Program, and they work as kind of an arm of HUD to ensure that folks are not discriminated against. They make sure that rights are preserved. They can connect you to other housing providers. They can kind of conduct the investigation, figure out what's going on, and that kind of thing. So I just thought that was a good, again, good thing to just kind of have on your radar. Also, related to, again, housing, currently the Illinois Emergency Homeowner Assistance Fund is open. So if you're having students now that are coming to you saying that they own their home, but they need help keeping their home, this is a possibility. And they actually do these information sessions about how to apply and how to get benefits. And they do them in English and Spanish. And there's actually one tomorrow in Spanish and Thursday in English. So I put those on here. If you follow the link at the bottom, it'll take you to the website. And then from there, you can actually click on the live links to actually attend the program orientation. So I thought those information sessions are pretty helpful. As you can see, they provide up to $60,000 in mortgage assistance to eligible homeowners. So I thought that would be a pretty great thing to have. And then if you do have students who are talking to you about housing foreclosure, again, there's another organization that is legal aid around this idea of housing foreclosure. They have, again, variety of organizations throughout the state that serve folks and help them kind of mediate what's going on. And it's free legal aid. So folks who may be losing their housing for foreclosure probably aren't going to have the funds to hire an attorney. So this organization, the Illinois Homeowner Assistance Fund, will help them navigate that process and, again, make sure their rights are protected. So you can see here, Prairie State Legal Services serves the counties indicated there. Land of Lincoln Legal Aid serves those other ones. And then Legal Aid Chicago covers Cook County. So that's got, again, in Spanish and English, and then the contact websites and phone numbers for that. So that's what I have for you for housing resources. For financial aid, I feel like this kind of falls into three different buckets. So FAFSA definitely is a bucket. ABE and SNAP is a bucket. And then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Carl Perkins post-secondary CTE grant, because I feel like it's bucket-ish. And there's definitely some synergy there that I think you all can kind of tap into in terms of thinking about services and support for students experiencing homelessness and youth in care. So we talked a couple sessions ago about the changes for FAFSA coming along, and especially around this unaccompanied youth determination. So the second link is basically a Dear Colleague piece that talks again about what's going on with FAFSA and the changes that are coming down the pike. The first link, though, is a fillable form to help financial aid officers and staff think through what these changes mean and which kinds of documentation are required or not required, but eligible to be accepted. So I thought that was kind of a great thing, that like those pieces kind of in conversation with each other. You've got the actual Dear Colleague letter from the Department of Ed, but then you've also got this other resource to kind of help your financial aid folks figure out what needs to be asked, what needs to be collected or provided, what's optional, what's not so optional. So I thought that was really great. The Dear Colleague letter is the most recent update. It was issued, I believe, in April, and kind of as a response to what the Department of Ed was getting back from practitioners, questions they had and that kind of stuff, again, about these changes to unaccompanied determinations. So I thought that was really the most timely piece of information we have on that. Most of your financial aid offices probably already have it, but I think it's worth you having too, just so you can kind of read and see what the financial aid office is hearing from the feds. And again, I'm not sure how financial aid offices do the back end paperwork for those things. So that fillable worksheet, I think, could maybe be helpful for that. And then the post-secondary resources for student in care. Again, I just kind of wanted to relist that item from DCFS and thinking about other ways to support students who are coming out of foster care, who may be eligible for additional support from the state. So those are things to kind of think about. And then also, just to put on your radar, I know we've kind of just missed the window where colleges are setting their tuition rates for the coming year. Something for you to always be thinking about is what's the maximum Pell Award for the coming year, and then how your college's tuition and fee structure approximates that number. So for 23-24, the maximum award is almost not quite $7,400. And that's if someone is going full-time and basically has a zero expected family contribution. So I think part of what's going to be tricky about supporting students is going to be, we sometimes think like, oh, if you have financial aid and you can use it on cost of attendance, you can use that to help pay rent or gas for your car, or daycare for your children, and that's true. But if we're looking at where colleges are going with tuition and thinking about how most students, if they have a zero expected family contribution and they're going to get $7,400, and if your tuition for a year is in the $5,000, $5,500 ballpark, that's not really leaving students very much surplus. So I think that's always something to think about and to talk about in your conversations when you're having those conversations around raising tuition, or what the tuition number should really be at your institutions. And I realize, like, not all of you have a lot of voice in that conversation, but I think when you see an opportunity or hear an opportunity, take the opportunity to talk about that. And then I wanted to also talk about ABE, SNAP, and the Farm Bill. So I think application for benefits eligibility is what ABE stands for. It's Illinois' effort to kind of pull various programs like SNAP and like Medicare under a single umbrella for applications, so that it's a little bit less chaotic for folks who are trying to use it. One of the things to know about ABE is that it covers youth in care up to age 26 if they were formerly covered by Medicaid when they aged out of the system, and if they don't currently have another way to get covered. If you're not sure if the student you're working with would qualify under ABE, then visit Get Covered Illinois, and then there's a link, like a button that you click, explore my health options, and it'll run you through a series of questions for folks to figure out if they qualify under which kind of thing. So I thought that was all helpful. There's also this SNAP eligibility calculator that helps you think through what are the sources of revenue you have, and then what does that mean in terms of your eligibility for SNAP. And then kind of connected to SNAP, I was trying to think about other folks on campus who could maybe be allies. And I was thinking about the Farm Bill and how the Farm Bill is largely about SNAP. When I say largely, I mean, it's like 80% of the Farm Bill is about SNAP. So I started thinking, those of you who have ag programs on campus, I'm sure your ag programs are strong supporters of the Farm Bill, because the part that isn't about SNAP is aid to various farming operations. So thinking about how you could maybe align with the ag folks on your campus to do a little advocacy around things like the Farm Bill when it comes out. There's this great organization, the Food Research and Action Center, FRAC, and you can get on their mailing list. They're happy to send you kind of updates about where we're at with the approval of the Farm Bill, and they are very much working towards greater equity for basic needs support for students at all levels, which includes us. So I just thought that was just kind of something I've been kicking around in my mind and just wanted to put on your radar. But FRAC does really great work. Their website itself has a ton of other resources that are really worth exploring. And they do a lot of connecting the dots between folks who have food and what they're able to achieve in school versus folks who don't have food and what they're able to achieve in school. So even just for future training purposes, think about using them for your own information around SNAP, but also to connect to the trainings you might want to do for faculty or staff. So those kinds of things. And then the last piece here is the Government Accountability Office, which probably sounds kind of like a strange thing to put here. But this is actually this arm of the government at the federal level that basically is taking data from all of these other pieces and parts of the government and then kind of puts it in a whiz mixer and comes out with really interesting data where you're looking at kind of this intersectionality. So like looking at HUD and looking at SNAP, and trying to kind of figure out how users of various programs then have certain kinds of outcomes in kind of a longitudinal way. So I just thought that was really great. They're nonpartisan. Their function really is to kind of do analysis and then inform lawmakers about how different programs are working and to just ensure transparency and save some money at the federal level. So like I said, they do really great research though, and they have all kinds of research on homelessness, on rent, on the cost of living and that kind of stuff. So I thought that was really great. Okay, so now we're going to talk about Perkins 5. So on your campus, there is a human being who this week is probably a little tense. The proposals for the Perkins grant for the new fiscal year are due, I believe, the end of this week. So folks are very busy working on this right now. In Perkins, you have a variety of activities you need to do that support programs of study in career and technical education fields. You also have particular populations that have been denoted as special populations. And these are groups that basically don't always have equitable experiences in CTE. So part of the charge of Perkins is to really kind of drive equity, especially in outcomes and enrollment for special populations. So you'll notice I highlighted two of the special populations. So individuals who are homeless as defined in McKinney-Vento, and youth who are in or have aged out of the foster care system. So right there, you've already got some alignment because the House liaisons are concerned about these populations, and Perkins 5 is also concerned about these populations. What it really also means is that whoever is managing your Perkins grant is trying to figure out how to track data about these two populations. So again, you have a friend there in terms of trying to figure out how do we identify these students? How do we support these students? How do we look at their outcomes over time? So if you can figure out who your Perkins grant administrator is and start to connect with them, I think you'll definitely find a kindred spirit there. If you're not really sure where to start with a dean in career and technical education. They can usually tell you who is in charge of that because they're usually pretty plugged into that that idea. So this is kind of something for you to consider in terms of what you can what you can maybe help support students with. Now, you can't use Perkins to pay for tuition, but you can use Perkins to try to figure out what are the supports students might need. So for example, if a student is homeless, they may also be low income, right? Or if a student is coming out of foster care, they may also be low income. They may not be able, so they may be Pell eligible, but they may not be able to afford the books for certain classes or certain kinds of uniforms or other kinds of equipment, not equipment, but supplies that you need for specific CTE programs, let's say that. So if you're able to work with your Perkins coordinator on this, you may be able to get them to do some kind of lending library where they're able to buy books for certain kinds of courses, and then you can refer your students who you know are experiencing homelessness or coming out of foster care to that Perkins person who can then help them with those resources so that that student doesn't then have to come out of their own pocket for those costs. Since again, a feature of this grant is to try to figure out how to support special populations. So most colleges are still scrambling a little bit on this end of Perkins. In the last couple of years, really, we've had 4 years maybe to kind of figure these pieces and parts out. Some folks have it a little more figured out. For the most part, if you contact your Perkins grant administrator and talk about, hey, we're both trying to figure this out, I think they would be delighted to have an ally in the work. And I think you'll be able to find some pretty creative ways to leverage the kinds of funds that they have available to help benefit your students in a way that helps the students persist. So so that's kind of the thing I was kind of thinking about with Perkins. I'm going to just see if you have. Okay. If you have questions about Perkins, let me know. Yes, so Sarah, yes. So the trick with Perkins is that it's got to be a CTE focus. You're right. So it's just for CTE students. And it's interesting too. I think at different schools, things shake out differently. You may find that most of your students who are experiencing homelessness or coming from foster care are CTE majors, or you may find they're more transfer students. So hopefully you find they're more on the CTE side and you can kind of work that out. But yes, I think the other way to kind of approach it is to think, what if we do a lending library and we want to make it something that all students who are economically disadvantaged can participate in? So what if we look at having Perkins fund the CTE part of that effort, and then maybe asking your college's foundation to fund the folks who are not CTE students, so that way you can kind of leverage those funds. Yeah, and so I think I also think though, Sarah, you have an interesting idea too, which basically is you can pitch this to other foundations and funders too, or even individual donors as kind of, hey, we've figured out we have this many students who are experiencing homelessness or youth in care, and here's what we're trying to do. We have a grant that will allow us to cover this idea for students who are career tech majors, but we don't have a similar program for folks who are in transfer pathways that are not CTE. So I think there are ways to kind of braid the funding if you think of it kind of that way. For sure. Okay, so for training, there are so many different organizations out there that are really doing great work. For the sake of time and PowerPoint slides, I picked 3. So these are the 3 I picked. So the first one is the National Alliance to End Homelessness. They have great dashboard information about what's going on in the state and in your region. So you can also kind of compare what's happening with homelessness in your region to other parts of the state. I also think that they do a nice job kind of knitting together the data that's coming in from the continuum of care, so you can kind of look at different kinds of disaggregation. And they also do a ton of stuff around advocacy. They really are focused on like national policy, and they do webinars and other kinds of conferences and trainings bountiful. So they're definitely a great organization to get on your radar. Definitely join their listserv, and you'll get a ton of resources and ideas to use in your own training. The other two of the other places are the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the National Center for Homeless Education. The National Low Income Housing Coalition has a lot of, again, focusing on this idea about equity and how housing isn't always distributed equitably in our society. So they do some really great advocacy at the national level. At the state level, the branch in Illinois is called Housing Action Illinois. So I also put that link on there for you. And then the bottom link is the National Center for Homeless Education. And again, they're looking at education as pre-K to 20, and they have, again, great resources, lots of fact sheets, talking points, different ways to think about transitioning students from secondary to post-secondary. The piece I put here on today's slide is about FAFSA. You can tell I'm kind of fixated on FAFSA, but just a little bit around like best practices and what the, in plain language, what the new FAFSA rules for FY 24 are going to mean for students in terms of unaccompanied youth status. So they just have a lot of great information there. And again, focusing on youth who are homeless, but also youth in care, and a ton on best practice stuff. So and all three of these entities also do some great advocacy for our students. And then looking also just at the Department of Ed has a nice piece I found about how to identify and support students experiencing homelessness. And again, looking at that transition from secondary to post-secondary. So I thought this was really helpful. The second piece is a film. It's about an hour and a half long, and it's called Home Stretch. And it actually follows three teenagers I believe they're in Illinois, as they kind of navigate the experience of being homelessness and experiences of trying to go to school and work. And I think it's got really good stuff in there about how to think differently about who we're serving when we talk about students who are homeless or youth in care. And I think it's also especially compelling when you're talking to staff or faculty, just building empathy and kind of thinking about who these students are. So I thought that was really great. And then the last piece is from the Homeless and Housing Resource Center. One of the things that's really great about this is this has these independent modules for training. You basically go and create an account, and then you can take whatever you want. And it's free, and they also have them calibrated with CEUs. So if any of you have that as kind of a thing. But basically, the Homeless and Housing Resource Center was established about 4 years ago. And they used funding from SAMHSA, the folks who are the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. And what they're really trying to do with their training is look at students and individuals who are experiencing homelessness, but also have a co-occurring thing going on. So they are homeless, but they also have a mental health issue, or they also have a substance abuse issue. And they try to then create these trainings to help you kind of think about these issues and how they intersect, instead of thinking about things in silos. So I thought, especially given kind of our previous conversations about higher ed and how we like a good silo. I thought these training courses were a good way to kind of break that down and kind of think about how these different pieces all intersect. So I thought that was really great. And then they also had this piece about, this actually isn't from HHRC. The bottom link is really from HUD. And it's these kind of case examples of housing discrimination. And I thought that could be a really great training resource, especially if you were trying to help folks at your institution think about what to listen for when students are self-disclosing. Because I think sometimes discrimination is overt, and sometimes it's a little more covert. And these examples do a really lovely job of pointing out overt discrimination and also less overt discrimination. But like I said, I thought that would be a really great way of kind of working that through with folks at your institution to talk about if this were a student who were disclosing the story, would you be thinking about discrimination, and would you be thinking about those resources we looked at earlier and how to kind of connect folks there. And then for other kinds of basic needs and kind of again, kind of other pieces going on with folks who are experiencing homelessness, the folks at the Hope Center for College Community and Justice did a really great piece about securing basic needs for students who are transgender and experiencing homelessness, most of them. So this I thought was just a great piece. So I put that on your list. The National Center for Homeless Education has too many resources to list. So I just picked these two pieces that I thought were great. But again, so many of them are great. But still, common signs of homelessness, again, thought that would be helpful as you're trying to do training. And it's a lot of those kinds of things we looked at in session 2, right? But this comes as a nice, clean, easy to read document. So you can use it as kind of a reading ahead of time or in conjunction with the training. So I thought that was really great. And then they also have this other document about effective teaching. And I really started thinking, like, you know, there are pieces in here that are transferable to post-secondary. For the most part, it talks about secondary faculty and what they're doing at that level to be effective instructors for a population that can be kind of well, like in trauma or in crisis, or can kind of be very transitory. So they looked at kind of these classrooms where students experiencing homelessness or youth in care were having really solid outcomes. And then they tried to kind of boil down what was common in each of those environments. So I thought that could also just be helpful. Like I said, it's kind of more geared towards secondary, but a lot of those ideas are transferable to the post-secondary environment. So but I guess for that one, I'm trying to give you sort of a warning, like you might not just want to hand that out whole cloth, because folks may think like, it's too much secondary level. But if you pull from it and say, these are the things that we think about when we think about effective teaching for this population, that I think could really work well and work nicely. And the National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, again, wealth of information there. One of the things I wanted to put on your radar is they also have a scholarship for post-secondary for students who are experiencing homelessness. And this link down here is the link to the actual application and all of the rules. It's due at the end of May, so not a whole lot of time there, but I just thought we've maybe got a little bit of time left. So, and they try to do a couple larger scholarships. I think it was like $5,000 or they're larger ones, but they also try to do smaller ones of 500 to kind of help defray the costs of other kinds of books and things. Now, this, I realize I may be starting trouble. One of the things that I noticed as I was kind of tootling around the internet was there are some job descriptions out there for basic needs coordinators. And again, thinking about the survey and thinking about how many of you are doing the house liaison piece on top of other kinds of things, I feel like at some point you may realize, like, now we have enough data, we can build this argument and let's move this to a full job description. So when you get to that point, or if you're at that point now, here are a few basic needs coordinator descriptions. And again, they couch it as basic needs coordinator. So it's not just the house liaison piece, but it's looking at all of those other pieces. So I thought that might be helpful. And then again, because you all know I'm somewhat obsessed with California. Down here, I'm putting the California State Community College survey, and it's also got like the protocol for how to do the surveys. They do a lot of focus groups and pre and post and that kind of thing. So I thought that was really helpful. And then, as always, the basic needs toolkit, kind of my favorite. And it's got a lot of information about how institutions are bundling these tasks together into job descriptions, and also kind of recommending the survey and how you can go about asking questions, getting information, and kind of building that data source. Okay, so we're finally to my super list. Okay, so from today's show, these are all the links, right? So the continuum of care, IDA, public housing by county, the ABE unified application for benefits eligibility, post-secondary resources for students in care. All of those links are on this particular slide. And then the basic needs toolkit and my FAFSA links are here. So try to put that all in one place. And then again, I really think one of the best things you can do to kind of get support at your institution is to push this idea of education and training. So for sure, products coming out of the Hope Center are really high quality. They really are getting down into the roots about basic needs, about students who are homeless or youth in care, and thinking about how to best support those students. So for sure, anything from Hope Center, cannot recommend it highly enough. And then again, kind of connected to that, the good people of CESI, the Community College Survey of Student Engagement, they're the folks from a couple, maybe that was just last time, where we talked about mission critical and how they're really trying to include more questions on the survey for student engagement now that are around basic needs. So that's going to be another great source of data for you to demonstrate need at your institution, assuming that your school is doing the CESI. And again, if they're not, the Hope Center does their version, which is called the Real College Survey. So that's another possibility for you to just kind of gather data that'll be kind of aggregate data. It won't be an individual student per se that you can follow up on, but it'll help you do some level setting at your institution for kind of the scope of this issue that you're trying to tackle. And then again, McKinney-Vento, if you're ever interested in the full text, there it is. And then for the good people at ICSPS, they have these great super strategies. They have one about working with foster care involved youth. They have one about supporting students who are homeless. They also have a great one about economically disadvantaged folks. So I feel like that you may as well pull that one too while you're looking at this. And if you're working with your Perkins person definitely knows about these super strategy sheets. And you can definitely use that as kind of a common jumping off point to look at, here are some ideas around recruiting, here's some ideas around retention. Let's use some Perkins funding to kind of underwrite these kinds of ideas. So for sure that. And then again, who would I be if I didn't remind you to always use plain language? So one more time, I put the Center for Plain Language link there for you. And then, I don't remember if I told you all this, but I started out in higher ed as a developmental reading teacher. So I feel like I always kind of default to that when I'm doing trainings and thinking about stuff. And there was this quote from Bell Hooks that I just like kept thinking about. And it's this: a true home is the place, any place where growth is nurtured, where there is constancy. And I feel like that is really the call for house liaisons. You are trying to create an institution where growth is nurtured and that it is providing constancy for these students. So for me, that's always the bottom line to come back to when you're doing this work, right? Or when you're thinking about what are the other resources we need to put together. Are you going to nurture growth, and can it provide constancy for students? And I think that's, at the end of the day, the best work that you are doing is when you are providing a true home for those students, and the home is your campus. So again, like, you're doing great work. And to me, this is really your charge at the end of the day. And I love bell hooks. So, I never miss an opportunity to use some bell hooks. Okay, so that is the whirly gig known as resources. What questions do you have for me about resources? Rose.
Yes. I'm running into the situation where I have students that need like immediate housing, and I'm from the Rockford area. I'm using the single point of contact, and that has not been working out well. I have someone, fortunately, that I know from a shelter that handled that process really quickly to get the student in, but it just happened to work out that way because there's not always beds available. So just would like to know anyone's take on like immediate help.
Yeah, and I think that you're kind of tapping into one of the key issues in Illinois. When Illinois moved to the continuum of care model, the money kind of went away from emergency shelter provision, and into housing construction, which again, like, that's great. Like, we want everybody to have their own permanent housing, right? But it definitely creates this kind of strange vacuum where it's difficult to have enough shelter beds for folks that need shelter. And there were a lot of overnight shelters that just kind of disappeared from the landscape because of that. But I think if others have successful ideas, jump in. I think one of the things, Rose, that you're doing, that's the right way to play the game, is like, make a contact that somebody you can call when this arises. And I think, did we already talk about pads? Some communities use pads as a way to provide emergency shelter for a single night, but that's sometimes it's a bit of a moving target because it moves from location to location each night. So you kind of have to keep up with, like, if it's Tuesday, it's in this church basement, or it's, in this community center. So that's taxing, let's say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And if no one else has a question, I don't want to hog time, but can you go into further detail about PADS?
So it's let me think what it stands for. It's something like people in action to demand shelter, or something like that. I can't remember the exact acronym, but it's very popular out here. So I live in the south suburbs of Chicago, and it's one of the ways that we organize out here. But it basically is kind of a kindness of strangers approach. So for the most part, it's different churches, different denominations get together and kind of organize who's going to provide a meal and a place to sleep each night during the week. So you have some folks where it's like, every Monday, there's the women's shelter is going to be at this community church. The men's shelter is going to be, thank you, providing advocacy, dignity, and shelter. Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. but it kind of moves around night to night. And it's not often, you kind of have to check the schedule and see, like, does the place take just unaccompanied women? Does it take women and children? Does it take men? So there's a little bit of jostling around to figure that out.
Thank you.
Yeah. Evelyn, do you use pads where you are? No, but you heard it before. Okay.
So I'm just gonna, oh,
I will get a contact for you for pads in the south suburbs. Devin, am I saying your name correctly? Okay. Great. And Rose, it's good to meet you. Anna and I have been chatting about you for the last couple of weeks. Your ears should be burning.
well, thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you too. I have another question too, because I'm not familiar as far as like connecting with local shelters, because I know it's confidential, but like how to tell the students what to expect, because I had a student with a large variety of luggage and things, and they weren't able to take all of that. And yeah, that was a problem that needed to be solved instantly.
Yes. Yes. How'd you solve it?
Guess who's storing this?
I was going to say, did the luggage live with you for a little while? Yep. Well, and you can see in the chat, I can see, right. Yes, Crystal, right. And then the shelters are open October to early May. Yep. And then in the nice weather, then yeah, there are that one of those resources I think also links to like warming centers for winter and cooling centers in summer, which is sort of a version of shelterish, but not the not I'm going to say like not a robust version. And then Jenny, I see you reached out to organizations in your area and scheduled meetings with them so you could build your contact list. That's a great idea.
Yeah, that was
So,
actually really helpful because in meeting with them, I actually asked what their intake process was like so that I could talk to, when I was speaking with my students, I could let them know what to expect, whether they were gonna be, having to share space with somebody, and if so, maybe how many people. And that's been really helpful in referring and actually getting students to reach out to organizations, because a lot of times they don't like to label themselves or don't like the thought of going to a shelter. But we have some shelters in our area where maybe they're just sharing space with one other person. And so being able to give that information to them has been helpful.
yeah, that's a great idea. And I know, like when I worked at an organization, there were kind of like different points too, where it was like dinner is served at 6, like the doors open at 5, dinner is served at 6, doors close at 10. So you had to make sure that you were there by a certain point in time too, which I think, depending on if students are working, what shift they're working, there are all these moving parts that you have to think about when you're matching a student to a shelter too. For sure. Yeah, but that's a great idea, Jenny. Thanks for sharing that. Has anyone asked their school to use the parking lots as car sheltering in place?
I just did that.
How'd it go?
Well,
Wait, should we should we
kind of
stop
pushback.
recording?
I'm getting a little pushback, so I put together a proposal to do it on a kind of like a pilot program, and suggested we work in conjunction with our police department and kind of limit it to the number of people they would be comfortable with. Right now, it's just kind of gone on to upper management, and so I haven't really gotten any feedback on it yet, but the feedback that I'm getting so far from my immediate supervisor is don't hold my breath.
Well, and there's a part in that that California toolkit that has all of the things to think about if you're thinking about doing this. So it talks about stuff that like I would never think about, like, oh, you need to make sure like zoning is okay, or so I think for sure to help formulate additional thoughts about your pilot, visit that basic needs toolkit from the California community colleges, because it's got a lot in there about what to think through.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was told it was probably something that'll have to go to our board for approval. So it might take a while to to get approval, but that's a great resource. Thank you.
Yeah, well, and good for you. Like if you don't ask, it's never going to happen. So, and if they say no,
Well, at least I tried.
you tried. I think it's also going to be one of those things where I'm not aware of any college in Illinois that's currently doing it. So I think the other thing you're sort of overcoming is being the first.
Yeah, I agree with that. I did research and looked at other states that are doing it. I grabbed a couple forms from a couple different schools that are doing it as like examples in my proposal, but I'll probably maybe amend it and add that information from the California toolkit. So thanks for that recommendation.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and keep me posted if there's stuff. I mean, and really this is for all of you. If you start to go down one of these rabbit holes and realize like you need more support to build an argument for one of these ideas, reach out to me and I'll do some additional research for you. Or I might even have stuff that just didn't make it into the PowerPoint, believe it or not. I know it probably seems like really like I know you don't believe me when I tell you I edited that, but
Well, thanks.
yeah. No, good for you. And Alex apparently also discussed the parking lot idea with their VP too. So like, good.
Yep, and Alex also asked about the slides. So just so everyone knows, in case anyone has to leave, the recording along with the slides with all of the wonderful resources Patty has shared will be sent out in an email. I'm saying by next week at the latest, because I'm going to give myself grace because we have the WIOA Summit coming up this week. But if you registered and I have your email through Zoom, and so I will share everything out with all of those who registered by next week.
And while we're waiting to see if we have any other questions, I just want to refer you back again to the links that Brittany posted about the next webinar in our House Liaison webinar series, as well as the House Summit that we'll be sending out more information on next week. And then also wanted to just put in a final reminder of the fact that there is a series on food insecurity that's being presented as part of the learning renewal events. You should have all received the invitation to that. The first one of it is tomorrow. So if you're able to join, please do so. I'm going to drop the registration link in the chat, and we hope that you will be there. If not, that will be recorded as well as the other events. So we would invite you to join for those, because I know that even though this is the House Liaison group, many of you are also working with students who are facing food insecurity as well. So it's just one more tool in your resource toolbox that can be helpful to you. So just wanted to jump in there, but we definitely have plenty of time for questions or more discussion. And I know, Patty, at one point we had talked about maybe stopping the recording and then allowing conversations that maybe we want to continue off of the recording. So we're happy to do that as well.
And I just put into the chat the toolkit and the safe parking stuff to which I was referring. It's on pages 68 and 69.
So Patty, thank you. I'm going to go ahead, since we did our full hour here, we'll go ahead and this will be the end of the recording, and I'll edit and make it all look nice, but I'm going to go ahead